chamber was very old, older than most of the species sitting in it. The walls were carved from something that looked like black stone but wasn't, and the air smelled like a library that had never once been opened. Ambassador Yara Osai had been sitting in this chamber for 3 hours, and she had not said a single word that mattered yet. That was intentional. The High Consul was still talking. Vreth was the kind of ancient that made other old things look new. He had been High Consul of the Galactic Council for longer than humanity had known fire, and he spoke with the slow, careful certainty of someone who had never once been wrong, or at least had never once been told so. His voice carried across the chamber like something being read from a very old book. The expansion of Earth's military infrastructure, he said, represents a pattern of behavior the Council finds deeply inconsistent with the spirit of galactic cooperation. The shipyards at Lagrange 7, the weapons facilities on Titan, the fleet exercises conducted without Council notification on no fewer than 43 separate occasions. He paused. He looked at Osai over the top of his reading glass, an affectation she found interesting for a being with 3 eyes. Ambassador. Earth has been building for war in a time of peace. We would like an explanation. Os looked at the glass of water in front of her. She picked it up, she set it down. Counselor, she said, let me be precise. She said nothing else for 3 full seconds. The chamber was very quiet. Earth has been building for preparedness, she said. There is a difference. We have filed the distinction in detail. File reference, Defense Doctrine, Volumes 1 through 9. We transmitted the full documentation to all 47 Council members in 2097. If the Council requires additional copies, we are happy to provide them. Vreth's expression did not change. The Council's concern is not about documentation, Ambassador. No, she said, I imagine it isn't. This was the thing about Yara Osai that made her very useful and occasionally impossible. She never raised her voice. She never leaned forward in her chair. She answered every question with the specific, factual precision of a person who had already won an argument and was simply allowing the other party time to realize it. She had been doing this for 31 years. She was very good at it. The counselor from Vereth Prime, a tall, blue-skinned species that looked like they were always slightly disgusted by everything, leaned into his microphone. Ambassador, Earth currently operates a fleet of warships that outnumbers the combined naval forces of the 12 founding Council species. Can you explain to this chamber why a species of your size and relative youth requires such capacity? Osai looked at him for a moment. Yes, she said. She did not elaborate. The counselor waited. Well, I was waiting to confirm you had finished the question. She folded her hands on the table. Earth requires that capacity because something is coming. We have stated this consistently for 40 years. We have filed the evidence, the models, the detection data, and the projected timelines. We have requested joint council action on 6 separate occasions. We have transmitted warning series volumes 1 through 11 to every council address on record. She paused. We were told on each occasion that we were being alarmist. A murmur moved through the chamber. Vreth set down his reading glass. Ambassador, the Council has reviewed Earth's so-called warning series. Our analysts found no credible evidence of any approaching threat. What your scientists interpreted as a pattern was, in the assessment of 11 independent research institutions, the natural background noise of deep space migration events. There is no enemy. Osai looked at him. She picked up her glass of water again. She was not thirsty. This was a thing she did when she needed one specific second to decide how to say something true in a way that didn't end a diplomatic relationship. Counselor, she said, let me be precise. In her left ear, the small device that connected her to SCREN, Earth's distributed naval intelligence, running across 47 ships and 9 listening arrays, had been quiet for the entire 3-hour hearing. Fleet-mind SCREN did not interrupt. SCREN filed things. SCREN logged things. SEREN waited. SEREN's voice came into her ear with the flat, even tone of someone reading a grocery list. Ambassador, 47 systems have gone dark simultaneously in the last 19 minutes. We logged this scenario in 2089. File reference, Omega Black 7, phase has begun. Recommend concluding current proceedings. Osai set down the glass. She did not blink. Across the chamber behind Vreth's head, the emergency display screen, which had been showing the standard galactic cartography image for 3 hours, flickered. A single system went red, then another, then 6 more, all at once, in a cluster near the outer rim. No one had noticed yet. Everyone was still looking at her. She let the counselor from Verath Prime finish his follow-up sentence. She waited for the word at the end of it. Then she looked down at the table for exactly 1 moment. "Counselors," she said. She stood up. "I need to table this hearing." Vreth frowned. "Ambassador, we have not concluded." "Permanently," she said. That was the word that changed the temperature of the room. Not the display screen, which 3 junior aides had now noticed, and were moving toward with the panicked energy of people who had never seen that color before. Not the low alarm beginning to hum somewhere in the building's bones. It was that word, delivered in Osai's precise, unalarmed voice, that made the chamber go quiet in a different way. "Permanently." The aides reached the display screen. One of them touched it. The map expanded. The red was spreading. It did not spread the way a fire spreads, slowly from one point outward. It appeared. One system, then another, then 12 at once, scattered across sectors that had no geographic relationship to each other, which meant it was not a wave. It was not a migration event. It was not background noise. It was coordinated. A council member from the back of the chamber said something in a language Osai's translator couldn't catch. The translator's face, however, she could read perfectly. Vreth stood slowly. He looked at the map. He looked at it for a long time. Then he looked at Osai. She was already gathering her papers. She did not need to look at the map. She had been looking at versions of this map, in projection models and threat assessments and 11 volumes of warnings, for the better part of her adult life. "Ambassador," Vreth said, and something in his ancient voice had shifted, something small, the way a crack in stone is small before it isn't. "What is this?" "This," Osai said, tucking her files under her arm, "is file reference Omega Black 7. She looked at him. Her expression was not "I told you so." It was something quieter and harder to look at than that. "We filed it in 2089. It was logged as received by the Council Secretariat. It was not opened." She moved toward the chamber door. "Where are you going?" Someone called from behind her. "To work," she said. She did not look back. Behind her, the display screen continued its quiet red arithmetic system by system. In the cold dark between stars, something that had never been stopped was introducing itself to a galaxy that hadn't been paying attention. Earth had been paying attention. For 40 years, Earth had been paying attention. The filing cabinet was open now. Everyone was going to read it. The emergency briefing room smelled like recycled air and panic. 14 council members had crammed themselves into a space designed for 8. Someone had forgotten to turn on the secondary lighting, so half the room was in shadow. Nobody had fixed it. Nobody had time. SEREN was reading. Not reading the way a person reads, slow and selective and filtering for the parts they want. SEREN read the way a river moves, everything all at once in the correct order. The Fleetmind's voice came through the room's speakers with the same flat, careful tone it used for everything: damage reports, weather data, the end of the world. Earth Sentinel Doctrine formally adopted 2061, SEREN said. Budget allocation, Year 1, 0.3% of Unified Earth GDP. Stated objective, preparation for a confirmed threat class designated unknown origin predator. Basis for designation, a pattern of silence. A council member, I didn't know his name, she had stopped learning the names of people who had voted against her 6 times, raised his hand. A pattern of silence. You built a military doctrine around silence. We built it around what the silence meant, SEREN said. There is a distinction. Osai stood at the back of the room with her arms folded and her face arranged into its neutral expression, which looked like nothing but meant she was listening to every single word and filing it. She had heard this history before. She had lived parts of it. She was not here to participate. She was here to watch the council listen to it for the first time, because the faces of people hearing something true after years of refusing to were worth observing carefully. In 2047, SEREN continued, Earth's long-range deep space array detected 14 systems in the outer rim that had previously registered active civilization signatures. All 14 had gone silent within a window of 60 years, not conflict silent, not collapse silent. Silent in the way a room is silent when the people in it have been removed and the furniture has been removed and the walls have been removed. Nothing was left, not debris, not residual energy. Not even the gravitational memory of structures that had existed for centuries. A pause. We noted this. We filed it. We received that report, a council analyst said from across the table. She had the careful, defensive energy of someone who knew what was coming. Our assessment. Your assessment was natural deep space migration events, SEREN said. We are aware. We filed your assessment. We continued our own analysis. Another pause. The flat voice did not change. In 2053, 6 more systems went silent. Same signature, no debris, no residual. The window had tightened to 40 years. The pattern was accelerating. On the display screen at the front of the room, the historical map loaded. It was not the red emergency map from the chamber. This one was white dots on black civilizations marked like stars, clustered along the galactic arms. And then, spreading from the outer rim inward, a slow creeping absence. White dots that had gone dark, marked with small gray circles like coins placed on closed eyes. The room was very quiet. Earth analyst Dr. Priya Anand filed the first formal threat assessment in 2058, SEREN said. She was 41 years old. She had spent 9 years on this data. Her report was 340 pages. Her conclusion was 6 words. The display changed. A document cover, old formatting, the kind that dated itself. And at the bottom, the conclusion, 6 words in plain text. Something is eating the galaxy. Prepare. The Council's response to Dr. Anand's report, SEREN said, was a formal letter noting that her methodology, while creative, relied on speculative pattern recognition rather than confirmed observational data. The letter was signed by 11 Council research chairs. We have the letter. It is file reference, dismissal 001. The Council analyst who had spoken earlier looked at the table. Dr. Anand died in 2089, SEREN said. She did not live to see this briefing. We note this not as a rhetorical point but as a factual one. We note it because the record should be complete. I watched the room. The counselor from Verath Prime, the tall blue one who had been so confident 4 hours ago, had both hands flat on the table in front of him. He was looking at the map. He had been looking at it since it loaded and he had not looked away. She recognized the look. She had seen it on human faces too, the first time they really understood what the silence meant. In 2061, SEREN continued, Earth formally adopted the Sentinel Doctrine. Shipyard construction began at Lagrange 7. The Council sent a diplomatic note expressing concern about the optics of military expansion. Earth responded with file reference, Defense Doctrine, Volume 1. The note was filed. Another pause. The Council's concern was noted. We built more ships. On the screen, a new timeline. Ship construction numbers by year, climbing slowly at first, then accelerating with the steady, purposeful momentum of a species that had made a decision and was not going to unmake it. The numbers were staggering even now. At the time, they must have seemed insane. In 2071, SEREN said, Earth detected the first direct energy signature consistent with an active unknown origin predator operation. One system, Outer Rim. The signature lasted 11 days before that system went silent. A beat. We transmitted an emergency alert to the Council the same day. File reference, Warning Series, Volume 4. The display pulled it up. The transmission record, sent, received, status, logged. Not opened. Volume 4, a council member said slowly. You said Volume 4. There were volumes before that. Volumes 1 through 3 covered the pattern analysis, the civilization silence data, and the proposed joint response framework, SEREN said. Volume 3 specifically outlined the recommended council response to a confirmed sighting. It was transmitted in 2067. It was not opened. The flat voice carried the same weight as every other sentence. It did not editorialize. It didn't need to. We also note that Volume 3 included a proposed joint defense treaty, the Threshold Accords, which would have given Earth authorization to deploy beyond its sector in response to a confirmed threat event. The Council declined to ratify the Accords in 2087. File reference, Accords rejection final. On what grounds? Osa asked from the back of the room. She already knew. She asked it for the room. The Council's stated position was that ratifying a defense treaty premised on an unconfirmed threat would send a destabilizing signal to other galactic civilizations, SEREN said. We filed the rejection. We noted the grounds. We authorized ourselves instead. That last sentence landed differently than the ones before it. Several heads turned toward Osai. She looked back at them with her neutral expression. In 2089, SEREN continued, Earth completed the Threshold Listening Array, a network of 17 deep space relay stations positioned at the edge of the identified silence zone. The array's purpose was to detect pre-assault signatures, the specific energy pattern the unknown origin predator emits in the hours before a system goes dark. The voice paused for exactly long enough. The array detected its first confirmed pre-assault signature 6 weeks after activation. The system was Veth Minor, Council Colony, population 2.3 million. The room had stopped breathing. We transmitted the warning, SEREN said. File reference, Warning Series, Volume 8. We included the pre-assault signature data, the projected timeline, and the recommended evacuation window. Veth Minor had 11 days. Another pause, flat and even. The Council's response was to request that Earth submit its array construction plans for independent review, as the installation had been built without Council notification. The screen changed one more time. The gray circles on the historical map, the silent systems began one by one to resolve into something new. Each one lit up with a name, a species, a population count, and then a date. 14 civilizations. Gone. Every one of them after a warning that had a file reference number. The room was silent for a long time. Outside the briefing room's small window, this station orbited a gas giant that had rings the color of burnt copper. The planet turned slowly, indifferent and beautiful. Then the emergency relay on the main screen lit up. A single transmission from the outer defense lines. Commander Park's fleet filing its first contact report. SEREN read it the same way it read everything. Contact confirmed, the voice said. File reference, Omega Black 7, Subentry 1. We have been waiting for this record entry for 34 years. Osei unfolded her arms. Pull up the fleet feeds. The map filled the screen. White dots, blue fleet markers, and from the dark edge of the display, something moving. It had no color on the map. They had never been able to assign it one. It was just the absence of everything else. Commander Young Park had a voice like a closed door. Not cold, not cruel, just shut. The kind of voice that had made a decision before it started talking and was now simply informing you of the outcome. He was 38 years old, and he had been preparing for this briefing since he was 19, sitting in a military academy classroom watching an old analyst's six-word conclusion written on a screen. Something is eating the galaxy. Prepare. He had prepared. He stood at the front of the war room aboard the Unyielding, Earth's largest command carrier, 17 light minutes from the nearest enemy contact point. The wall behind him was a full tactical display, blue markers for Earth's fleets, gray sectors for Council territories, and the black edge spreading slowly from the upper right corner like ink dropped in water. He had a pointer, he used it. "They don't conquer," he said. "I want to be precise about this from the start. Because the Council's threat models have historically categorized them as an invading force, that categorization is incorrect, and the misclassification is part of why we are where we are." He touched the display. A system appeared, labeled, annotated, zoomed in. This system, Vareth 9, had a population of 800 million, agricultural civilization, no military capacity worth measuring. When the unknown origin predator finished with it, we sent a probe. He turned to the room. The probe found nothing, not ruins, not bodies, not atmospheric residue, not the gravitational shadow of structures that had existed for 600 years. A pause. Nothing. The Council members in the war room, 7 of them, the ones with enough security clearance and enough nerve to be here rather than the briefing room, were very still. The counselor from Vareth Prime had insisted on attending. He had not spoken since he sat down. "They don't leave debris," Park continued. "They don't leave survivors. They don't leave anything that tells us what happened. What they leave is the silence that Dr. Annan identified in 2058, total, complete, as if the system was always empty." He moved the pointer to a new sector. "What they do leave, and this is what the threshold array was built to detect, is a pre-assault signature, an energy pattern in the hours before they move on a system, faint, spread across multiple frequencies. Easy to miss if you don't know what you're looking for." "How did Earth know what to look for?" the Council's xenobiologist asked. Her name was Dr. Tail. She had a researcher's habit of leaning slightly forward, like the question mattered more than the answer. "We built a picture from the silence," Park said. "We mapped every system that went dark. We charted the sequence, the timing, the geography. We calculated vectors. We worked backward from nothing until the nothing had a shape." He let that sit for a moment. "Then we designed the array to detect that shape before it completed itself." He looked at Dr. Tail. "We were right about the shape." She wrote something down. She did not look up when she said, "You designed an entire military doctrine around a threat you'd never directly observed." "Yes," he said. "That's 40 years of preparation," he said. "That everyone in this room told us was paranoia, I'm aware." He turned back to the display. "Moving on." He clicked to the next section. Schematics, ship classes, weapons specifications. Years of development laid out in clean technical rows, designed by engineers who had been given a single directive. Build something that can fight a thing we've never seen, based on the shape of the silence it leaves behind. Earth's first, second, and third response fleets are deployed in a layered kill zone formation across 4 sectors, Park said. The design is based on what we know about their movement pattern. They advance in a broad front rather than a point, which means a concentrated defensive line fails. You can't stop a wave with a wall, so we don't use a wall. He traced the formation on the display. We use a net, distributed, overlapping fields of fire, multiple redundant positions. If they push through one sector, they compress into the next, and the compression is where our weapons are most effective. "Most effective," Vreth said from the corner. It was the first thing he had said since he entered the room. His voice was very quiet. "What does that mean in real terms?" Park looked at him. "In real terms," he said, "it means we slow them down, we reduce their advance rate, we protect the systems in their path long enough to evacuate them." He held Vreth's gaze. "We are not going to stop them in one engagement. We are going to make every engagement cost them something. We are going to make this planet and that colony more trouble than they're worth to consume until we find a way to stop them completely." The pointer came down. We have theories about that. We are testing them. You've never fought them before, a council military advisor said. He said it the way someone says something when they need to hear themselves say it. Not directly. No, Park said, but we've wargamed them 10,000 times. We know their movement patterns. We know their advanced signatures. We know what the silence looks like from the inside because we've built simulations from the data and run every scenario we could construct. A pause. We are as ready as 40 years of preparation by an entire species can make us. And the Council's forces, the same advisor asked, can we contribute? No, Park said, the word wasn't rude. It was just a fact stated in the same flat tone as all his other facts. With respect, Council forces have not been designed for this engagement type. Deploying unprepared assets into a contact zone would create additional variables we'd have to manage. We'd spend resources protecting forces that can't protect themselves. He pulled up a new section of the display. What we need from the Council is not ships. We need evacuation corridors. We need civilian transports moving people out of the projected advance path. We need the colony systems on this list. He highlighted 12 systems in gold, evacuated within 72 hours. 12 systems, across 4 Council species territories, billions of people. The room registered this. 72 hours, the counselor from Vereth Prime said, his voice doing something complicated. 3 of those systems are mine. I know, Park said. That's why they're first on the list. There was a small silence, and in it was something that wasn't quite gratitude and wasn't quite shame. The specific, uncomfortable feeling of realizing that the person you dismissed for 30 years made sure your people were first on the evacuation list anyway. Dr. Tail spoke again. Commander, when you say you have theories about how to stop them completely, what does that mean? Park looked at her for a moment. He was quiet in the way he was always quiet, not hesitating, just deciding exactly how much to say. It means we found something in the pattern data, he said. A gap, a behavior they've repeated across every recorded contact event. It may mean something or it may be coincidence. He turned back to the display. We are treating it as something. What's the gap? She pressed. They've never encountered anything that fought back long enough for them to need a second approach, he said. Every civilization they've consumed has either been unaware, unable to respond, or broken within the first engagement. He looked at the black edge of the display. We're going to be the first thing that doesn't break in the first engagement. What happens after that, a small pause, we don't know. Nobody does. There's no data. He set down the pointer. There's going to be data soon, he said. The war room was quiet. Outside the unyielding's viewports, space was black and full and entirely indifferent, and somewhere in it, the advance line was moving, and Earth's first fleet was 30 minutes from first contact. Park's earpiece chirped, he touched it, listened. He picked up the pointer again. That's the first fleet, he said. Adjust the display, he clicked. We're starting. The black edge on the tactical screen began to resolve, into shapes, into contacts, into something that had eaten 14 civilizations without slowing down, meeting, for the first time in its entire recorded existence, something that had been waiting for it. The Council watched. They had no frame of reference for what they were about to see. Park did. He had been building that frame of reference for 20 years. The first thing the Council learned about watching a battle was that it was nothing like they expected. They had expected fire, drama, the kind of vast, visible destruction that filled space with color and wreckage and the clear, readable language of victory and defeat. The Council's own military history, what little of it existed, because most of the founding species had not needed to fight a real war in centuries, looked like that. Grand arcs, noble charges, enemies that announced themselves. This was not that. This was SEREN's voice, flat and even, reading coordinates. This was numbers changing on screens. This was Park standing at the tactical display with a stillness that should have been calm but wasn't. It was the stillness of total, focused attention, the way a very still pond is still because every current is running under the surface. First Fleet contact confirmed, SEREN said. Enemy advance front, width 4.3 light seconds, moving at projected speed. First Fleet is engaging. On the screen, the blue markers and the dark edge touched. Nothing exploded, nothing flashed, the numbers just began to change. Advance rate reduced by 11%, SEREN said. First Fleet holding formation. Sector 1 holding, Sector 2 holding. Sector 3, a pause that was 1 second long, Sector 3 is under pressure. Third Fleet adjust position. Park touched his earpiece. De-Jong to Third Fleet. Sector 3 collapse your left anchor to position 7 and hold. A pause. Confirmed. The markers shifted on the screen. Small movements. Careful. The way a person moves their hands when they're dismantling something delicate and dangerous and very, very complicated. The council members watched. One of them, the military advisor, had stopped writing notes. He was just watching now, with the concentrated expression of a student who had been studying the wrong subject his whole life and had just realized it. "What are they doing?" Dr. Tail asked very quietly. She wasn't asking about the enemy, she was asking about the humans. "They're not letting them push," Park said without looking away from the screen. "They advance, we compress. They compress, we redirect. We're not fighting them straight, we're fighting them like water, shaping where they go, not stopping where they are." He pointed to a cluster of blue markers on the screen's left side. "See that? Those are the evacuation escorts. Second Fleet running colony ships out of the advance path. We're buying time for that. Every hour they don't get through Sector 3 is another 60,000 people clear of the kill zone." The counselor from Vereth Prime was watching the evacuation markers. His 3 colony systems were highlighted in gold on the far left. The first one had already cleared. The ships were moving. He had not said anything in 40 minutes. "First Fleet casualty report," SEREN said. 2 carriers damaged, 1 destroyer lost. Lost, one word, plain and final. Osai, standing at the back of the war room, looked at the marker where the destroyer had been. It was gone from the screen now. Just a coordinate where something had been and wasn't anymore. And inside that something had been people who had volunteered for exactly this, who had known exactly what the odds were, and had shown up anyway because someone had to. She looked at the ceiling, 1 second, then she looked back at the screen. "Advance rate reduced by 19%, SEREN said. First Fleet is holding. Third Fleet repositioning complete. Sector 3 holding." A low sound went around the room. Not celebration, something more careful than that. The sound of people exhaling a breath they hadn't realized they were holding. "What was the advance rate when they came for Vareth 9? Dr. Tail asked. "They reached the planetary surface in 3 hours, SEREN said. "We have held Sector 3 for 4 hours and 12 minutes. The room went quiet again. 4 hours, where every other civilization had lasted 3. Park didn't acknowledge the math. He didn't turn around to see the expressions on the council members' faces, though Osai could see them from where she stood, the slow, dawning comprehension on Vreth's ancient face, the way the military advisor's pen had stopped moving entirely, the way Dr. Tail had pressed her hand flat against her notepad and was staring at the screen with an expression that was trying very hard not to be what it was. "Second Fleet status," Park said. "Evacuation corridors clear," SEREN said. "Colony transports from Systems 1 through 4 are outside the advance front. Systems 5 through 8 in progress. Estimated completion." The screen spiked. A new contact signature from a direction nobody had been watching. "Secondary advance front," SEREN said. The flat voice didn't change. "Right flank, undetected until now, they split." Park was already moving. "Third Fleet right flank now. Pull from Sector 3 center, reinforce right." "That empties Sector 3 center," the military advisor said. "Yes," Park said. He was on the comm already, his voice dropping lower, the quiet getting sharper the way it always did. "Third Fleet, you have 60 seconds. Move." The markers moved. The screen was a conversation happening at speeds the eye could barely track, positions, redirections, the constant living adjustment of a formation that had been designed to flex and not break. Earth's net, spreading and closing and spreading again. The right flank stabilized. Sector 3 center held barely, on 2 carriers, and a destroyer wing that should not have been enough and was. For 20 minutes, the war room was pure silence and numbers. Then SCREN said, "Third Fleet primary carrier, severe damage, Commander Park's ship." A pause, communication offline. The screen didn't show it dramatically. The marker just stopped receiving updates. It went static gray, blinking. Gray for unknown status. The counselor from Vereth Prime looked at Osai. She was looking at the marker. Her hands were at her sides. Her face was arranged very carefully into its neutral expression, and anyone who didn't know her would have thought she was fine. Anyone who knew her would have noticed she wasn't blinking. He reached across and put his hand on her arm, a quiet gesture, the kind a person makes when they have nothing to say but feel the need to say something. She looked at the hand. She looked at the screen. "He does that," she said, to no one in particular. Her voice was precise and quiet. "Goes quiet, then he's somewhere else." The room waited. The gray marker blinked, once, twice. Blue. The Third Fleet beacon came back online, repositioned. 40,000 kilometers from where it had gone dark, placed in a new angle that hadn't existed in the formation 30 minutes ago. Still moving forward. A sound went through the room, small, involuntary. Park's voice came back on the comm as if nothing had interrupted it, as if the silence had been a choice rather than a crisis, as if he had simply stepped away from a desk to get something. "Third Fleet, confirm your right anchor position." A pause. "Confirmed, hold." Osai blinked. "Once." "Advance rate," she said. 31% reduced from initial, SCREN said, and holding. 31%. Against something that had never been slowed down at all. Against something that had eaten 14 civilizations the way fire eats paper. The evacuation markers on the left side of the screen ticked over. Systems 5, 6, 7 clear. System 8 in progress. People alive who wouldn't have been alive without the formation holding. People alive because 40 years ago, Dr. Priya Anand sat down and wrote 6 words and spent 9 years building the case for them, and was dismissed, and kept working. Because Yara Osa had sat in chambers just like this one, for 31 years, and answered every hostile question with file references and the quiet certainty of someone who knew they were right and was willing to wait. Because D. Young Park had spent 20 years wargaming a fight nobody believed was coming, in ships that got laughed at in council chambers, with crews who had signed up anyway because someone had told them the truth. SCREN filed the after-action report at the 4-hour 40-minute mark in the same voice it used for everything. Phase 1 complete. Enemy advance halted across all primary sectors. Earth forces reduced to 61% operational capacity. Secondary advance front contained. Evacuation corridors systems 1 through 8 clear. Systems 9 through 12 in progress. Recommendation: proceed to Phase 2 as designed. This outcome falls within acceptable projection parameters. The Council military advisor looked up from his empty notepad. "Acceptable," he said slowly. "What does that mean, acceptable?" Osai turned from the screen to look at him. Her expression was the same as it had been for 31 years of hearings and dismissals and unopened files. Precise. Even. Carrying the specific weight of a person who has been patient for a very long time and has now run out of the need to be. "It means," she said, "that we planned for it. A beat. We planned for all of it." 3 days after Phase 1, the Galactic Council convened its first full emergency session in 400 years. Every seat was filled. Every council species had sent someone. The chamber, the old one, with the black stone walls and the library smell, had been reconfigured for crisis proceedings, which meant more screens and worse lighting, and a low hum from the emergency relay systems that hadn't been switched on since before most of the junior delegates were born. Osai stood at the podium at the front of the room. She had slept 4 hours in 3 days. She had eaten something at some point that may have been a meal. She had changed into a clean suit because she was representing Earth, and Earth's representatives did not appear before the full Galactic Council looking like they'd been through a war, even when they had. She set her notes on the podium. She looked at the room. "Counselors," she said, "Earth has a proposal." She had given speeches in this chamber before. She had testified, filed responses, requested, recommended, disputed. She had spoken into this room's formal silence many times, and it had looked back at her with the patient, unmoved expression of an institution that was very old and very settled, and did not feel the need to rush. This room did not look like that today. Today the room was the specific, raw-edged attention of people who had watched the tactical feeds for 3 days, who had seen the evacuation markers clear, system by system, who had watched Park's beacon go gray and come back blue, who had sat in the war room and done the math on advance rates and knew, in the way that knowing something in your chest is different from knowing it in your head, that the 41 systems in Phase 1's path were alive, because Earth had been building ships and filing warnings since before most of them were adults. Osai did not make them wait for the proposal. She was not theatrical. She had never needed to be. "The threshold accords," she said, "revised and updated. We've been working on the new version for 8 years in the assumption that we would eventually need it. It covers 3 things." She touched the display. The document appeared clean, organized, dense with the specific, careful language of people who had thought very hard about every word. First, Earth is granted full operational sovereignty over its military forces, with no council authorization required for deployment in response to confirmed unknown origin predator activity. We are not asking for permission to protect people. We will not ask for it in the future. We are asking for formal recognition of what is already true. No one objected. That was new. Second, a joint early warning framework. The threshold array expanded to cover all council territories, maintained by Earth but accessible to all member species. We share the data, all of it, in real time. No more 11 volumes that nobody opens. She paused just long enough for that to land. The warning system works. We proved that. We would like to stop being the only species using it. The council xenobiologist, Dr. Tail, was nodding slowly. Third, the Sentinel Doctrine becomes a galactic framework. Earth trains, Earth advises, every council species that wants to build a real defense capability, not a diplomatic gesture of a military but an actual one, we help. We share what we know. We share the models, the wargaming data, the weapons specifications. She looked up from the document. We spent 40 years alone on this. We are not interested in spending the next 40 years alone on it. The chamber was quiet. Not uncomfortable quiet. The kind of quiet that means people are thinking, really thinking, in the particular way that people think when they have recently been frightened, and are now trying to build something out of the fear so it doesn't just sit there. Then High Consul Vreth spoke. He spoke slowly, the way he always did. But there was something different in the voice. Something had moved in it. Some old certainty that had been there so long it had become part of the architecture had shifted. "Ambassador Osai," he said, "Earth held that advance for 3 days, at 61% operational capacity, against an enemy that has never been stopped." He paused. "Why did you fight for us? We owed you nothing. We censured you. We dismissed your warnings. We called your people alarmist and paranoid. We voted against you 6 times in this chamber." His ancient voice was steady, but something underneath it wasn't. "You owed us nothing. Why?" Osai looked at him for a moment. The room was very still. "We didn't fight for you," she said. The voice was precise and even. "Something in the dark was eating the galaxy, and it was going to get to us eventually. You were in the way. Removing you from the path was tactically necessary." A beat of silence. "We also couldn't watch," she said, quieter. The precision still there, but something underneath it that wasn't precision. "We had the capability to do something, and we couldn't watch people die when we could do something about it. That part wasn't strategic." She looked at the notes on her podium. That part was just human. Vreth was quiet for a long moment. Around the chamber, the various species of the Galactic Council sat with the specific, uncomfortable weight of people who have received a gift they did not earn and cannot give back. "The third term," Vreth said finally. "The joint training framework. Earth is willing to share all of this. The doctrine, the weapons, data, everything." "Yes," Osai said. "After what we did with your warnings." "Yes." "Why?" "Because we want them stopped," she said simply. "We want them stopped before we have to do this again. We want every species in this galaxy armed, trained, and paying attention. That is more important than being right." She looked at him steadily. "We can be right later, when this is finished." Srien's voice came through the chamber speakers at that moment, present, as it always was, filing, as it always was. "Transmission incoming from Commander Park, 3rd Fleet, patching through." The main screen at the front of the chamber lit up. Park's face appeared. He was on the Unyielding's bridge, and behind him the damage was visible, panels out, repair drones moving in the background, 3 crew members at stations that still had running lights. He looked like someone who had slept about as much as Osei had. He looked exactly like himself. He looked at the chamber full of alien faces, and then at Osei. He nodded once. She nodded back. He cut the feed. The screen went dark. Osei turned back to the room. "We are proceeding to Phase 2. Phase 2 covers the remaining advance front and 3 secondary vectors we identified in the Phase 1 engagement data. We have already adjusted the formation." She closed her notes folder. "We expect it to be harder than Phase 1. We have planned for that." "Do you need anything from the Council?" Dr. Tail asked. "Anything at all?" Osei thought about it for a moment, really considered it. "The evacuation corridors," she said. "Keep them open, keep your civilian ships moving, get people out of the projected path. That's all we need from you right now." She picked up her folder. "And ratify the accords today, not in committee, not in review, today." She stepped back from the podium. Vreth reached for his reading glass. He put it on. He looked at the display screen, where the full Threshold Accords document was still up, all its pages, all its careful language, the revised version of the thing that had been proposed in 2087 and voted down and filed away. He looked at it for a moment. Then he reached beneath the podium in front of him and pulled out something that should not have been there, something old, a physical document, the kind that hadn't been used in council proceedings for a long time. It was a file, a physical file. Osei recognized the cover. She had seen it in Srien's records. She had known it existed. She had assumed it had been lost or discarded or buried somewhere in the Council's archive. Warning Series, Volume 1, dated 2051, Dr. Priya Anand's original threat assessment. The full one, 340 pages of pattern data and model projections, and the careful, exhausted work of a woman who had spent 9 years staring at silence and understanding what it meant. Someone had printed it. Someone had kept it. It had ended up here, in this chamber, filed somewhere nobody had looked until 3 days ago when someone had gone looking. Vreth opened it to page 1. He read. He read the way old beings read, slowly, carefully, giving each sentence the weight it had waited 74 years to receive. The chamber was quiet around him. People waited. He read all of it, or enough of it that the room had gone from waiting to watching. the specific watching of people witnessing something that mattered. SEREN's voice came through the speaker very quietly, nodding the event the way it noted everything. File reference 2late001. First confirmed reading of Warning Series Volume 1 by a sitting council member. Timestamp March 14, 2125. We have waited 74 years, 3 months, and 11 days for this record entry. Osai was almost to the chamber door. She did not smile. She came close. She walked out into the corridor, where the lights were bright and the air smelled like something other than old decisions, and she stood for a moment with her back against the wall and her eyes closed. Somewhere out past the station's hull, across a few light minutes of cold, dark space, D-Young Park was repositioning his battered fleet for Phase 2. Somewhere in the array stations, SEREN was watching the advance front, filing every change, logging every signature, waiting. Somewhere in the records of a long and careful human effort to do the right thing before it was too late, 40 years of warnings were finally, slowly, being read. Too late for some of them, not too late for all of them. That was the calculation Earth had made. Not victory, not glory, not vindication. Just some of them saved. She opened her eyes. She went back to work. In the chamber behind her, Vreth reached the last page of Volume 1. He turned to Volume 2. He kept reading.